welcoming everybody to our first sacred music seminar. And if you have, let's see, how you want to set yourself up, make sure you hit the chat button in the lower portion of your Zoom screen. If you scroll down, or if you move your mouse down, I mean to say, towards the bottom, you'll see a button that says chat. And that opens up a window on your right-hand side. And what you'll want to do is, where it says to all panelists, I'd say change that to all panelists and attendees, and you can write a little message if you want to talk to folks during this. I've also, we can put questions for Nancy as we do this program in the chat. You're also welcome to use the Q&A function and send us the questions that way. That is also a button that's found at the bottom of your screen. You press that to open up the Q&A feature, and you can send us some questions. Our guest tonight is someone who I've known since the fall of 1996. Wow. When I had just finished going through puberty, and maybe debatable, but found myself at the Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was very fortunate to land with the esteemed Nancy Galbraith, Professor of Composition. And just as a personal note, if anyone is ever considering going to study with somebody at the university level for 4 years, don't do what I did, which was not meet the person before you go and sign up. I had no idea what I was getting into, probably not the smartest move, but boy, was I lucky, that is to say the least. I had a wonderful 4 years studying with you, Nancy. And yeah, and so it's been a wonderful friendship and musical relationship over the years. For those of you who have, this is your first time maybe meeting Nancy virtually. I know some of us met Nancy when she came to Montview a few years ago. We premiered the orchestral version of her Missa Mysteriorum. But those of you who don't know Nancy, let me give you a little short, quick introduction. Nancy is still at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she is now the chair of the composition department. And she's been writing music for, 4+ decades at this point, and has had numerous commissions from the Pittsburgh Symphony. Wonderful conductors have done her work, including the late, great Marius Jansons, Keith Lockhart, Robert Page, over a dozen recordings that have been released. And yeah, if you go to her website and click around on nancygalbraith.com, you will, if you head to works, you'll see it is a prolific career that continues to this day. So yes, we welcome Nancy Galbraith to our first Summer Sacred Music series. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here, Nancy.
Thanks.
So we'll you've got a program lined up for us, I guess, and so I'll do a little less talking than I just did, for sure. That would be nice. But to start off with, let me just ask kind of the coronavirus question, just to kind of get us a shared experience here. Some people know that you were a church music director, but you recently resigned from doing that about a year or so ago, but you are attending a church, and your church isn't meeting. And of course, you haven't had classes and all that stuff. So what is life like for you right now in coronavirus times?
Well, it's settled down, obviously, but when, like all of us, mid-March was pretty shaky, and students didn't know if they were coming back or not, and then some did come back to campus, and we had to, had to figure out what the heck Zoom was, like all of us, right? And you know, so we were all on kind of shaky grounds, and for me, and it was actually mid-Lent when this hit. And our church, of course, everybody did, you know, we were, went on lockdown. And it was during that time, the first piece you're going to hear, Onata Luke's, is actually, it's the oldest music that you'll hear tonight, but it has something that just happened to it, which was my husband, I commissioned him to put a video to it. And that came out of, it was kind of an idea I had because our pastor of our church kept putting up online pictures of our church just to keep everybody in contact. And it was very comforting. And then I got the brilliant idea, why don't I put some music? That would be great, because Matt likes to do videos to my music. And that's sort of, so we did a series of 4 videos, and this was the last one. One of them, of course, was the one with the pictures of the church. And then we had other themes. We even did some staging in our house.
Nice.
Yeah, right. Well, this particular one was the last one that we did. And it has, and it feels kind of comforting, especially in these pretty tumultuous times. It felt kind of comforting to us to do a video that had churches from around the world, all kind of churches. And that's what this video is. We just thought it might be a nice thing to lead off, and I'd like to share this with you.
Yeah.
Hope that you find some comfort watching it.
Yeah, let's watch it. I'll give folks just a little preamble, or not preamble, but I can't find the right word, but in the playback here, the video will be a little bit, might be a little herky-jerky on your end, but the audio should be really nice. Yeah, turn up your speakers and enjoy. Let me just pull this up, make sure I got the right thing here. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. Lovely.
Thanks.
That's really nice.
Thank you.
Um, Tell us a little bit about that piece.
That was, believe it or not, that was a high school choir. It was similar. It was an academy. Yes.
Really?
And it was an academy, and it's attached to a monastery. It was a commission from a monastery. It's part of a larger work called Lumen Christi, and it was I think it was the 150th anniversary of these Benedictine monks that in Lisle, outside of Chicago.
Yeah.
And this is an academy that was associated with them. I was just amazed when I heard them performing. It was similar to the Kent plays.
Yes.
You know, I mean, they were so, I just couldn't believe their Latin was so good, and their attitudes, and they were so respectful. It was a wonderful experience.
Yep.
The acoustics in that place.
Oh, I can imagine. And was that just a live performance recording, or did they go, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty excellent. We're getting some folks in the chat here on the side, including one member of the Westminster Choir who has already said that we have to sing that piece.
Oh, right.
So, we've sold some music tonight, Nancy. We're only 15 minutes in.
I have 3 more videos.
I know. Well, so let's, what I'm really excited about with the program that you've picked out tonight is that it's it's a lot of newer music of yours, for starters. So it's music that's new to me too, which I've really enjoyed getting a chance to hear it and check it out in preparation for tonight. And it also, you know, we talked about this being well, it's a church. It's obviously we're a church, Montview, and it's you know, it's kind of under the auspices of sacred music. But you know, the music you've picked out for us actually is the whole breadth of your kind of creative output. And you know, and I've always thought it's kind of hard to, you know, it's not like you go ahead and turn off your spiritual switch when you go write a concert piece. So I'm really excited that you included some of the works that you did. I would love it, before we start to move on to the next piece, maybe just in this context, which is in some ways maybe the simplest thing we'll hear tonight, which is not meant to be a criticism. It's just
think it that way.
Yeah, 4-part, or I'm sure there were some divisions in there, but essentially SATB a cappella. Mm-hmm. You want to tell us a little bit about, you know, your approach in that piece in general when you're writing SATB a cappella?
Well, I would like to talk about, maybe part of what you're saying too is, well, first of all, I do a lot of, I taught harmony for like 10,000 years. So I do pay a lot of attention to voice leading. And I also did a lot of work with a very renowned conductor, Robert Page, as you know. And he actually, the mass that you guys did, which, by the way, I still have a poster hanging in my office that's in lockdown now at Carnegie Mellon. We talked about that. Right. I love the poster from Montview. Yeah. So, but anyway, that piece was originally done with Mendelssohn Choir of Pittsburgh and conducted by Robert Page. And I learned tons about choral writing from him.
Is there anything, I mean, do you want to talk about that in more specifics? Like, was there any kind of moment where you guys were in conversation with each other? And for those of you on the call, this is, if you don't know of Robert Page, he followed Robert Shaw right at in Cleveland, I believe, doing the choir there after the symphony choir after Shaw left. And then of course he went to Philadelphia, and he was at Temple for a while. And some of us have that album, that Christmas album, right, of Eugene Ormandy Sounds of Christmas or whatever it's called with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and Bob Page is the choir conductor on that. And then eventually he found his way to Pittsburgh, where he did ran the Mendelssohn Choir for many years, which is the choir for the Pittsburgh Symphony. Folks that are outside of Pittsburgh probably wouldn't know that fact. And of course, he taught at Carnegie Mellon for many years as well. So, yeah, is there anything from those meetings that you wanted to get into, or?
I mean, we did a lot of talk about technique. He was very, very big on making sure that text set properly in the meter that you were in.
Yeah.
So we used to have a lot of conversations about that. Because if you study different composers, their text settings are different depending on what language. Even they can, like a Russian composer versus like if you studied Stravinsky or someone and his mass, and then looked at something in Latin by him and something in Latin by Mozart, and then a French composer. The rigidity with which they do text setting is quite different. And so I had a lot of discussions with him about that. Yeah. But just for normal Americans, he really stressed, and I had many conversations with him about that, about setting proper, because I wrote a requiem that they also did, and that was just, it was over an hour long. So there were a lot of really tricky phrases. He used to tell me my alto part was boring. I said, no, I like boring alto parts.
That's funny. I can tell you tell me if you don't want to jump down some of these rabbit holes. I'm going to have a hard time controlling myself. I think the way you set text is really wonderful and exceptional. And especially when you start to consider, and people will hear this shortly when I stop blabbering and we move on to the next piece. But especially when you consider the fast stuff, I feel like, there you go. Yeah, Jim.
I like that comment.
Yeah, especially when you consider the fast stuff. And I think when we eventually get to the Four Nature Canticles, there's some great examples there of how you're able to put text and have it flow almost effortlessly, especially to the listener, but in really kind of complicated rhythmic. So I guess before I get off of this, 2 questions for you, and then we'll move on. I promise we'll stop jumping down the rabbit hole. One is like, now that you've done this for so many years, do you have like kind of a way you approach it? And then 2, as you were kind of at the start of your choral writing, were there certain composers or whomever that you admired for their text setting capabilities?
Not necessarily text setting, but I was raised Lutheran, and my mother was a Lutheran organist for 60 years. And I grew up with Bach in my veins. And I would have to say that even to this day, Bach is probably my go-to person as far as choral writing. Just to sit down and enjoy choral writing. I love the Magnificat.
Yeah.
Just, he would be my go-to person.
Yeah. And then, anything about like the way you set the text, how you kind of figure that out for yourself when you're composing?
I sit down and I look at it because form is a big thing to me. And I sit down and with the piece you just heard, for example, I look at it and I look where I think it's pretty obvious in that one, and there isn't that much text. But a lot of times if you're looking at a poem and it's fairly long, you have to figure out for yourself where the high point is in the music. And I'll that's the very first thing I always do, is try to figure out, and then that kind of pieces it together for me. And then I like to find phrases. It's just kind of something that I like to do. I like to find phrases or words that are interesting to repeat. And I just did a piece, or it was just performed right before the pandemic, and it was a Langston Hughes poem, and it had the word Mississippi in it. and I just loved playing with the word Mississippi.
Right.
Because, I like there are phrases I like to repeat because I like the phrase or I like the word. And you'll hear a little bit of that in the next piece coming up, I think.
What a great segue.
Yeah.
Almost like we planned it that way.
Right.
Why don't you tell us about the next piece we're about to hear?
I included this piece because it has to be the most unusual piece or commission I have ever received. It was a very powerful situation that was going on. It was done in a closed down steel mill in Pittsburgh. And a lot of the people that were at the concert and in the choir, they all have roots. Everybody in Pittsburgh knows somebody. We all grew up, with people that worked in the mills. And this one was in Homestead, and actually it had, it's where the Pinkerton Guards shot some of the workers. It was a very, very, very intense and powerful place to be, and very emotional. And anyway, when I was, it's a funny story. I had very short time to write it, and that's a whole other.
Yeah, I think you should tell that story because I think that's a good insight into. You can leave names out to protect the innocent if you'd like. But, I think it's also a great insight into what composers have to contend with.
So the conductor, who's a very dear friend of mine, and he came and he said, "Nancy, I have a great idea for a piece." And he said, I was walking around and somebody had taken him on a tour of this steel mill, because people do tour it. It's fascinating. And he said, I had an idea to do a piece or to do a concert there. And wouldn't that be great? Would you like to write a piece? And I said, sure. Well, year goes by, don't hear anything. And that was in May, and the following May, that's a year later, that's the end of another school year, summer goes by, and so it's at the end of that summer, so a year and 3 months later, I got a phone call from the artistic director of the Bach choir, and he said, do you want to meet about this piece? I said, what piece? Oh, yeah, that piece. And we met, and he starts talking about it. And then I said, well, what else is on the program? And he said, oh, you are the program. And I said, oh, okay. And so, meaning that it's going to be a fairly substantial piece of music, right? And then I said, and then he starts talking about it, and he said, and we hired somebody from the Pittsburgh Opera. And I'm going, oh my God. So then I said, well, when do you think I need to have it to you? And he said, would the end of November be a problem? And now, mind you, that was the very first day of our semester, so my time is limited at that point.
Right.
I said, oh, no, it won't be a problem at all. I'm going, oh, my God, is this a problem? Right. I took off. I went straight home. So I had basically 3 months to write this piece. And
if you weren't also sharing a composition department at the same time,
would also and a church job.
And a church job. That's right.
Yeah.
Church job. That would also, if you were just, holed up on some random island in Puget Sound.
Caymans.
Caymans, much better. That's still quite the turnaround, 3 months to write a.
Oh, yeah.
How long did the piece end up being?
It's over an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's over an hour. But I found what the thing was, I found a text. I was like grasping for texts, and they wanted it to be about the steel industry. Now, how much poetry do you know is written about the steel industry?
Right.
It's not like you find, look to Shakespeare or something and try to find things written. But anyway, I found this Smoke and Steel, Carl Sandburg, and it was perfect. It even mentions Braddock, and the actual mill where this was performed is actually even mentioned in this. It's a long, very strange narrative mixed in with poetry, and I quickly divided it into 4 sections. The first section kind of begins with a lot of very colorful words that we were just talking about, words like hissed and smoke, a lot of smoke. Yeah. And it was kind of describing the workings within a mill. the second section turns a little bit darker, and it's talking about the difficulty that workers had, the long hours, the strain on their bodies, and so forth. And then the third section kind of turns pretty dark. And it begins, as a matter of fact, kind of graphically. You're not going to hear that movement, but about, you know, workers dying. Mm-hmm. And I realized right now that all of the music that I picked to play for you out of this is all from that section, the third section. I didn't even plan it that way. Just there's some of my favorite spots in it. Well, anyway, the fourth section gets lighter at the end. You know, kind of reprises sort of the thoughts of the first section. These are my interpretations. It's not like these were put into sections. But anyway, then the third section, I have to tell you, my husband will kill me. At the end of the third, so the end of it, it gets, like I said, it's pretty dark and kind of solemn throughout the third section. And then it just bursts loose at the end of the third section. And with this, it's called Curves of Fire. It's speaking of the fire and the visions that some worker is having as he's looking into the fires, I'm assuming. Yeah. And at the end, there's still an operating train that goes by. It's still operating because it's by the river, and there's still an operating train. And at the end of the third movement, so there was a concern what would happen if, you know, well, sure enough, it went back on the second night of these performances. It went by at the end, and this movement is so loud you couldn't even hear it. You could hear it coming, but then when the movement ended, the section ended, and the train and the conductor just stood there very, you know, dignified.
The music conductor, not the train conductor.
Yeah, not the train conductor, the music conductor. He just sat there. He just waited. He didn't sit. He just waited, and very, very great. Yeah. You know, just waited until the train was gone, and then he started the fourth section. Well, I mean, that was actually powerful.
Oh, I can imagine.
Amazing.
I mean, short of being in a New York City jazz club and feeling the subway go by, I can't think of any other kind of concert experience. Well, and when we're about to watch the video here in a second, Matt, your husband, who is your manager and publicist and all those types of things, and also your video guru, did a very nice job putting this video together, showing exactly what the space is like. It is wild, and you can see in the video of the orchestra, heat lamps, right? Propane heat lamps that are set up. And the fact that the folks in the audience are just sitting on folding chairs out on gravel, whatever.
Mm-hmm. There was no heat. There was no plumbing. But before I forget, yes, I have to tell you that when the train that was live, right? I can't forget this, or my husband will kill me. And he's in the next room. But
I wonder if I need to have an intervention here or something.
Right. So 2 months later, he went back to that spot and sat there and waited for hours for a train to go by.
Just so he could put it for the video.
So he could put it into the video.
Are we going to watch the train go by in this video?
No.
Okay.
Oh, we are. Oh. Yeah. We're not going to watch the whole train go by. Or maybe we are. I don't know.
Hey, before not to get us off the train, but I think we've I think you're good now with Matt. I don't think you have to worry anymore. Do you want to tell us a little bit about? It seems like it was a pretty large choir. What, about 100 voices or so in the choir? Does that seem about right?
I don't think they're maybe 80.
80,
something like that. Yeah.
And then I'm assuming you picked out the instrumentation, or how did you come up with because it's a little bit of an unusual band, so to speak, in that, just how did you come up with the instrumentation for it? I mean, it's an orchestra, but then there's also, like
I had guitar in it, and I knew I wanted trumpet in it because it was, I don't know, it just felt right. Yeah. And it had, I wanted guitar in it just to get some kind of grit.
Yeah.
Of the orchestra.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think, should we play it? Yeah. Okay, let's play it. Let me pull it up here. And for some people, it is possible that you might, if your internet's slow or whatever, you might only be able to hear it, but hopefully everybody can see it. So here we go.
Go slide, hide, hide. Go slide, hide, hide. Go slide and steal. Go slide and steal. Go slide, hide, hide. Go slide and steal. Go slide and steal. So. Go slide and steal. Go slide and steal. Go slide, hide, hide. Go slide and steal.
Like heavy
Slide and steal, so, go slide and steal.
in mirrors,
Go slide and steal, go slide, go slide and steal.
like heavy armlet,
Go slide and steal,
in mirrors,
go slide and steal.
like heavy armlet,
Go slide and steal,
in mirrors,
skulkers, skulkers,
they shadow dance,
skulkers,
in laughing through,
skulkers,
they shadow dance,
skulkers,
in laughing through, they're always there, they never answer, they're always there.
Thank you.
crash one by one. Goodbye then smoke, and in the streets the great sisters of the night and cool stars, sitting women are painting their hair, waiting in the sky, waiting and murmuring, since you know all and I know nothing, tell me what I dreamed last night.
The aforementioned train. Well, for the continuity experts out there, I believe that concert was at nighttime, and that train shot is clearly late afternoon.
Wait, it wasn't at night. No, it wasn't.
Oh,
No, there's no light in there. What am I thinking? It was in the afternoon.
there you go. Okay.
Continuity.
Love it. Okay, so yes, we're being admonished by your previously referred to husband for like, come on, we're gonna run out of time. Gotta hear this music. So I will do my best. Zip it at him. Nancy, tell us what's next.
The next, we were talking before, I like to write pieces for specific people. And I have really admired this percussionist. She was a student at CMU. I knew her for a long time. And we just were talking one day, and the conductor was there, and I said, I want to write a concerto for you. And she said, sure. And so that's the next piece. And let's see, it starts with a bit of the opening, but I really wanted to segue into the very quickly into what it started as 3 separate movements, and then I kind of blended them all together, so it's one long movement. But this would be in the middle, you'll hear a marimba solo, and that would be what you would consider to be part of the second movement. And then it goes into this very strange, because it does flow from not only movement to movement, but kind of like east to west. So there are a lot of gong kind of things, and singing bowls and so forth at the end of what would be considered to be the second movement. Right. And then it goes from her cadenza to the end, and she's just wildly interesting, very, very dynamic and wonderful to watch and hear.
This is the contemporary ensemble from
Carnegie Mellon, yes.
Carnegie Mellon. And so this is a group of music majors, right, that perform maybe 4 or 5 concerts, or is it more than that through the
probably like 3 a semester.
3 a semester.
Yeah.
A lot of new music, obviously. and both from faculty and also fellow students. That's kind of, and then of course there's repertoire, new music repertoire that they're playing as well. Just to give people an idea. There are so many things I want to say, but that is not helpful at this time. So we have a whole 45-minute conversation about how you use percussion.
You'll hear how I use percussion.
That's right. That's right. We don't need to talk about it. We just need to listen to it. So,
which, by the way,
yes.
real quick, Matt, sorry, real quick, we were supposed to be leaving for Ubud, Bali this week. It was like a bucket list trip of mine, and Matt just texted, just ignore me. But it was it's a bucket trip, one of those bucket list trips, and right. I love gamelan music, and that kind of which is Indonesian folk music, basically. And you'll probably hear elements of that. You know I like percussion, right?
Yeah.
And actually, everybody makes fun of me for liking percussion so much.
They need to get over it. That's what I
say. They do. Seriously.
Yeah. Seriously. All right. Let's see here. Here we are. That's a lot of percussion equipment we're about to.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, now you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Hey.
Do I like percussion?
Yeah. You like percussion? Yes. Yeah, I was just asking if you could see the comments that are coming up on the side. So, yes, I think we can definitely email out the names of the pieces that we've listened to tonight. And yeah.
Well, I love that. I love the way she performed it. I mean,
oh yeah,
word. And I love at the very end where she just kind of goes, bam, I got this.
Yeah. A little bit of, yeah, like.
She's kind of very matter of fact. Just, it's like a workhorse.
It's a total workout. And she just is like, yeah, yeah, I'd be like, oh.
Well, I thought that I did some outrageous things. You didn't hear a lot of it. That was just like very short excerpts, but what you didn't hear was there was a lot of djembe in it, African drumming, and she just nailed it. I thought I had asked her, or at least had notated things wrong or something like this, and I said, let's meet and I'll show it to you, blah, blah, blah. And she said, she just looked over the score. She said, yeah, I got this. Okay. She didn't have anything to say. She said, I got this.
I got this.
Yeah.
We don't need to meet. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I said, sorry, I wasted your time. I got this because I thought I was asking for some like really outrageous things.
Right.
I got this.
Hey, let's just take a 2-second break or 2-minute break before we move on. Let's take just a couple questions I'm seeing coming up in the chat. Nancy Getzinger, who is an alto in Westminster Choir, wants to know how many choral and orchestral pieces approximately do you, if you had to take a guess at this point of your career?
I don't write boring alto, I swear. I'm an alto, and as I saw a comment about that, he told me to do things that I wouldn't want to do as an alto. So there.
Right.
But you have to understand, I started as my very first choral things were for my own church choir, which Adam, you've conducted actually.
Yeah.
But I started, I might have been, I don't know how old I was, but I wrote for my own church choir, and I started there. The very first piece that I ever wrote that was actually a really large, big, what I would consider to be big choral work was the Mass.
Right.
That was the very first thing. Every other thing that I had done were either small commissions for fairly modest, maybe to VC. But as far as how many things I've written, my husband does my website. He would know better than I would. Like maybe. Well,
let's put that plug in. So yeah, let's say go to nancygalbraith.com and click on works. And you can
there you go.
And
I've lost track.
Yeah.
I have music that I don't even know. When I left my church job, I had too much going on. But when I left my church job, I left like tons of music behind that I'd written. Somebody would need, or I would say, you know what, I think we need a new, I'd write a Lamb of God for this week. Well, you know what it's like, and I'd write a Lamb of God. I don't even know where half of that stuff is. Some of it's written by hand, and I've lost it. And most of it's on the computer. Just tons of liturgical music, actually.
Let's see. So let's keep going for now. Yeah, let's keep going. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the next piece?
For Nature Canticles.
Yeah. How'd this piece come about, Nancy?
I forget. Some ridiculous guy asked me that.
Yeah, there it is.
This is Adam.
Yeah.
That commissioned or that performed these pieces, and for
Kent commissioned you.
Commissioned, yeah. It was the Kent Place, was it called? Kent Place Singers.
Yeah.
I just remembered something. We did an interview there. I did, and I can't remember why people weren't talking. Do you remember that? There was something that happened.
Oh, I think they were just, because we went to the choir, and you did a master class, and I think that they were just kind of totally.
No. It was some protest. But
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it was some. I'm just having a flash because nobody.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Some feminist thing, I believe.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll talk later about it. I actually remember what it is.
Oh, okay. I don't remember. But
I think it was a professor at the school.
I didn't know that, but everybody was like, had their, and I was like asking, and I thought, boy, these kids really don't like me, or they don't know, because nobody was talking.
And I also, they're an impressive group of kids, and it was
I love them.
Yeah, treble voice. It's an all girls school in Summit, New Jersey, and it was a treble voice choir. And Adele Thomas was their conductor, who did just an amazing job with them, and presumably still does an amazing job with them. And I had done one concert with her before, and approached her with this idea, thinking, your choir is excellent, and she went for it, and so happy that she did. Certainly stretched those kids, but they really rose to the challenge.
Oh yeah.
So and it's with the Lyrica Chamber Orchestra, right, which is the chamber music series that I used to be involved with in New Jersey. And if I remember correctly, I think we commissioned you to. Well, this was because I think we paired this with a Randall Thompson piece. Place the Blessed, or
I forget.
Oh yeah, which is also, but the instrumentation is very close to like the Copland, Martha Graham, right? Appalachian Spring 13th.
Yes.
Oh, my dog has now made an appearance to this webinar. That's Reba, everyone, if you're just joining us. Anyway, how about sorry, I'm spacing for a second. Oh, tell us about the poems that you chose for this piece, and the poem in particular that we're going to hear in this movement.
Again, I wanted them to be about nature, obviously. And Emily Dickinson is somebody who really speaks to me. Her poetry really speaks to me. And usually, I remember sitting down, and the opening, some of my older music I don't like anymore. I really like these canticles a lot. And I remember sitting down at the keyboard, and just kind of the opening of this one kind of came out, and So
it's great.
And then there's a wide variety of styles in this one. There's an E.E. Cummings. It's pretty strange. But anyway, this one I like.
Okay. And the nice thing about this video is we get to follow along in the music. It's the audio that Matt chose to use for this video is we actually did a professional CD release of this. So we spent a few days in the church recording it all and editing it together. And then he's taken that recording, which obviously is available on CD, and I think maybe some download sites too, but he's paired it with a video of the sheet music going by, which is kind of fun. So you can watch the sheet music for this. So let me see here, get this ready to go. Here we go. Hey, I didn't forget to unmute myself this time. Yay me! That's a great memory to. That's a nice little trip down memory lane listening to that piece. So thanks for writing that again. That's a great movement.
I still, sometimes I get a little bit nervous when I hear something from before, but that's funny about being a composer. You always think the thing that you're working on right now is the best.
Right.
The best thing. And then somebody will want to do a piece from 10 years ago and I'll say, what? And then I go and and everybody's all excited about it. And then I go and I hear it. Oh, that was really not bad.
Yeah.
Some things that I will always, they will be, and that's one of them. I've stuck with that one.
Yeah, I get that. It's funny to hear you say that though, because there are obviously pieces of yours that I hold still in very high esteem. I mean, the Mass obviously being one of them. And yeah, but I get that, especially as the creator, you're always trying to evolve and hone your craft. And so.
I'm always, every new piece that I write, I always want to try something different.
Yeah.
I was tooling around today and I'm working a little bit with electronics. I'm going, I don't know. But I like to challenge myself.
Hey, speaking of electronics, that might segue really nicely into our last piece. And then, Nancy, if it's okay, can we get you to stay on the line for an extra 10, 15 minutes or so to take some questions? Because
sure.
I feel bad that I've sucked up all the oxygen on the question asking. But we will, let's listen to the last piece on the program and then we'll turn it over to the folks in the chat and see what kind of good questions they come up with. Why don't you tell us quickly about, well, you take your time. I don't mean to tell you to be quick.
Quickly.
Tell us about this piece, which is so awesome. I know I just said tell us about this piece, but I just listened to this piece for the first time today and it's brand new, essentially, right? I mean,
yeah, it was done last year or last May, yeah.
And oh man,
this woman is wild.
Yeah, and we're talking about the flautist, not yourself.
Yeah. Oh, well, what's funny is the person who commissioned this piece said she asked me if I knew, and I said no, I don't. And she said, "Are you kidding me?" Because she's from Pittsburgh. She's not from Pittsburgh, but she was in the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble. Okay. And so she said, I can't believe you don't know each other because, in other words, you're so much alike that, right? And she is like drinking 10 espressos or something. She's wild. And wait till you see, then hear her perform. She's amazing. And just a performer, not just a technician, but she is a performer. But I met her on in some south side of Pittsburgh and in this coffee shop, and she came in and I had no clue she was, and she obviously knew who I was. And when she walked in, I knew she was because she owned the room, And when she ran over and she said, Nancy, I guess she knew what I looked like, and she just ran over and she screamed and she hugged me and she was jumping up and down. She's just exuberant. She's a wonderful person. And wait till you see her perform.
Yes, which it would be great. So, and I'm always like in composers forums or whatever, when people kind of get into too much of the extended technique stuff, I'm like, hey, let's just leave it about the music. So I don't mean to bring this up as a distraction from how beautiful this piece is. And just on the merits of the music alone, it is just really, really nice. Having said that, I think it would be really beneficial to the folks on the call if you could describe just a couple of the extended technique things that you use that we're going to watch before we watch it.
Well, first of all, halfway through the second movement, and it's the only time that this happens in this whole, there are 3 movements, and you're going to hear the whole second movement in its entirety, and then just a little piece at the end of the last movement. But about halfway through the second movement, she turns on an echo kind of effect, and the whole idea was to kind of make a swirl in the room. It's being done in a very large synagogue in Pittsburgh, and there were balconies on either side, And when you hear the opening of it, you'll hear crotales over up in the balconies. So you hear like it's like a stereo kind of effect. And then at the end, at the climax of it. And somebody told me after they thought that it felt like the heavens opening at the climax of the second movement. And that's when she's got the echo going. And at the end of the second movement, she does, this is one of the techniques, she does what's called a wind sound. And she just, blows into it and blows into the flute very quietly without making any actual notes. And it's panned from one side of the room to the other. And if you watch her, she goes like this, and when she's performing, she goes like this, and she watches the sound echoing across the room. It's priceless. But there's that in it, and then there are a lot of what are called tongue pizzicatos, where you just kind of, it's kind of, if anybody's familiar with Jethro Tull, a lot of those kind of techniques that were considered to be, nobody thought Ian Anderson did extended techniques. That was kind of his thing. But there's a lot of that, and I believe there's a lot of flutter tongue with glissando in it. But she's a person that is known to do contemporary music, and I really wanted to make use of. So it sounds in some places, in some places it's very percussive sounding.
Right. There's also at the end of that second movement, the wind sound as you're describing, but there's also like this weird like half whistle.
Oh, whistle tone, that's it. Toward the end, those are really, really difficult to do. It's a harmonic on the flute, and it's very, very difficult to control. So it's just called a whistle tone. That's what you'll hear at the end of the second movement.
I did not know about that. That's super cool. All right, let's see. Let me pull it up. And this will be our last piece before we open it up to some, I need to rewind this because I was listening to it before. Take it back to the beginning. Okay, and hit this button, and hit that button, and here we go. There's definitely some showmanship there.
You think? I love it though.
It is awesome, and that piece is so great.
Thank you.
And I just, I mean, I'll have to listen to the whole thing in its entirety, but having heard the whole second movement, what I just love about the second movement, among many other things, is just how those extended techniques don't feel extended. You know, they totally belong, and they're.
I wouldn't use them otherwise.
Right.
I don't believe in that.
Yeah. Let's see.
Somebody just asked if it was amplified. It was amplified. The only movement, she turned on, if you notice, she turned it on in the second movement.
Yes.
So the rest of it was not.
Gotcha.
She wouldn't allow it, actually.
Yeah. Well, and that whistle tone bit, I mean, could you even, if that wasn't amplified, would that even be audible?
You have to be really careful how you use that.
Yeah.
And I was counting on it being amplified at that point. So that's the only way that would have been heard.
Right.
I mean, it's barely heard. It's barely heard even with amplification.
Right.
But I knew it was going to be amplified at that point. She allowed amplification for the second half of the second movement. Did you notice how she followed the wind sound across the room?
Oh, yes. I didn't notice it the first time, but then after you had told me about it, I was like, oh,
I didn't notice it at all, because every time I hear a piece of mine in live, a premiere,
right.
I always listen with my eyes shut.
Oh, really?
I don't know why. I don't know. I like to just be in the music, and I don't like distractions. I don't like to look at somebody looking at their watch.
Well, there is that. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't want to,
Right.
I don't know. So I didn't even see her do that at the performance.
Yeah.
I had my eyes shut.
It's
And
such
did you happen to notice who the percussionist was? One of the percussionists.
Yes. Abigail.
Yes.
What's Abigail's last name again? I've already forgotten.
Langhorn.
Langhorn.
Yeah.
Percussion.
There is more than one percussionist in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Let's. We're already over time, but we're going to hold on for another. Langhorst is right, not Langhorn.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I said Langhorn. It's Langhorst.
No, I said that too.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Don't tell her I said that. Jeez.
Let's take if there's any questions from the folks on the chat in the remaining 10 minutes that we have. And if there are no questions, that's fine too. I just feel bad that I did all the talking. I didn't let anybody else chime in. So if you have a question, go ahead and write it in. And if you don't, we'll let Nancy get some sleep. Because it's 2 hours ahead where she is right now. And she's been so kind to stay up late for us. Let's see.
Somebody said, oh, John, I listen to a lot of Tall.
That's right. Okay. John Gerner, who just wrote this just to us, the panelists, so not everyone can see this, but I will read it out loud here. He says, the latest work, that's okay, John, we forgive you. The latest work is the best as for many creators. So what are you working on now?
You know, it's really strange. I'm working on a piece that is, it's a group, and actually one of the performers that commissioned it was in the flute concerto. She was a violinist.
Uh-huh.
And it's got an ensemble called the Cassia Ensemble, and it's strings and, let's see, geez, I've been working on it all day, clarinet and harp. And then it also is in conjunction with a choir, the Pittsburgh Girls Choir. And so they wanted it to be a movement of the Cassia Ensemble alone, and then the middle movement would be both of them together. And then I think the end movement, they wanted it to, or I don't know. I'm still working it out. They're leaving it up to me, but they wanted to have one movement two movements that they could do alone and then together. You know, so anyway, I've been working on it, but what's tough now I have two premieres that were canceled last semester, and or last year. I mean, not semester. And one of them was a huge organ concerto, and it was to be done in this really, really large church in East Liberty, where the center for a lot of the protests in Pittsburgh now. Yeah. If you see in Pittsburgh, if you pay attention, East Liberty. Right. And anyway, this East Liberty Presbyterian Church is kind of one of the hotbed places that these are happening, but it's a huge church, huge organ, and it was going to be with the Carnegie Mellon Wind Ensemble. That was canceled, and then another piece for the contemporary ensemble was canceled. It was a double concerto. So it's hard to write music now. It's hard for the performing arts. It's a difficult time.
Right.
Because, you know, I wish that I had a solid deadline. If I do, when I have deadlines like Smoke and Steel, I can like go crazy. I mean, I can just focus in and work so hard. And if you don't have a deadline, it's so hard to do. Yes. And a lot of my friends who are musicians, it's hard for them to continue practicing with their summer programs being canceled and so forth. It's a rough time for performing. It's a rough time for everybody.
Right. It's one of the joys I've had, I guess, during this very difficult time is we film our music portions on Tuesday at the church. The joy that's on everyone's face when they come in, and it's usually just one instrumentalist or sometimes two people, especially if they're, from the same household or something like that, just to be back in the sanctuary. And it doesn't matter if it's some folks from our choir, or for instance, we had this wonderful viola duo from the Colorado Symphony come in and play husband and wife viola duo. And you could just tell as soon as they, got there, it was just like, yes, we're making music in front of people that, more than our cat and our iPhone. And,
And Matt in the next room.
Right.
Well, he and I play guitar and piano together, Matt and I.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And you guys were in the pit of your church's production of Joseph and Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which I thought was just so endearing. If anybody has another question, Susie Phillips wants to know if you could play a little something on that piano.
It's too out of tune. I'd be embarrassed. I'll show you the piano. That's my synth. This is my work area right here. My piano is over here. There it is.
Oh yeah.
It's really awfully out of tune.
We're not judging. And
you would be if you heard it.
And people should remember that you play organ too, because that was, as the church you were music director at, you had to conduct the choir and play the organ at the same time.
Well, when we joined our new place, I thought that we could be anonymous.
Yeah.
But I'm doing the right amount of church work right now, which is subbing on the organ, and that's perfect for me.
You need to send us the organ concerto music so we can check it. Please.
The organist is fantastic.
Barbara is fantastic.
She's fantastic. I heard the piece that you played, you did Fanfare Copeland.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she's so good.
Yeah, she's on the call right now, so that's good that you're saying that.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
No, she's fantastic.
Yeah, she is awesome. And I think she just was recording some Hindemith this week for service. I mean, Barbara's got awesome taste in organ music, and especially new organ music, which is so cool. Nancy Getzinger was talking about your range of styles being marvelous and marvelous. Maybe we can turn that into a question real quick, and then if anyone else has a question, now's the time to write it. But is there anything you want to say about like how you occupy such a broad range of styles?
I think my personality, and it would be true for just even my personality, I'm either, we're gardeners, and I'm either right out in the backyard in my garden alone, and in a very peaceful kind of state, or I am wired. And I think that I'm really wired.
Yeah.
And I think that you see that range in my music. I think that my middle movements are always extremely out there, like very, very ethereal, I suppose. I don't know. And then you've heard examples of my wired.
Extroverted side. You got your introverted and your extroverted.
My extroverted side, not my introverted side, and that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Ask Matt for when I read the paper in the morning and he's just trying to do his New York Times crossword puzzle, and I said, "Can you believe?" And then I'll go off on some story I'm reading, which is at this time could be just about anything.
Right.
On the front page of the paper.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're not the only one who is having that reaction these days, but yes. Yeah.
And then also, keep in mind, I grew up with rock and roll. I'm a child of the 60s. And I grew up with rock and roll. I still love popular music. I love gamelan music. I love African drumming. And I love church music. I love Bach. I said that's my favorite composer. So, I have a wide range of music that I truly, and one of my favorite genres actually is called sacred harp.
Yes.
Yeah, which is, if you're interested, you should look it up. It's sacred harp, and it's performed in a square. It's choral music, performed in a square, and it's pretty raw Appalachian folk music. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So some of that, like maybe in Smoke and Steel, some of that came through. Some of the more Americana kind of things.
I hear that. Yeah. Well, I think that's at the end of the day what gives you your distinct sound.
Yeah.
And which I think is really also a really wonderful trait about your music, is that you're able to evolve, right, and create new. You're not rehashing, but it still exists in this this palette that you've created. It never sounds like you're trying to be somebody else.
Well, thank you.
And not all composers can say that,
I'll tell you something. The flute concerto was on something called, the concert was called American Serenade. And the other two people on the concert, it was Copeland and Bernstein. Mm. And I thought, I like to see who I'm paired up with. Yeah. You know what I mean? On a concert. Yeah. I always think that's interesting. And I was actually very proud of that, because I would like to consider myself part of that genre of American sound, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think you rightfully deserve to be up there with those names.
I'm not saying I'm the same caliber. I'm saying I like the genre.
It's a you can make the argument that you are in my book. So that's,
that's good enough for me.
There you go. We'll take it. Nancy, thank you so much for
thank you, everybody.
Staying up late on a Thursday night. It is a Thursday, right? I'm totally losing track of
I should be in bed.
I know, it's almost 11 o'clock. Thank you for everybody that was able to sure, Barb was great on the organ, but how would that gone, Blair? Thank you, John.
He was like incredible. I've never heard anything like it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being on the call. We recorded this. Yeah, so we'll put this up on the Montview website too, so you can go back and check. Thank you all. This was a lot of fun.
It was.
Yeah. Let's see here. Folks are just writing in. Thank you. Yes, come back again. I agree with that sentiment. We've got to get an excuse to get you out here to Denver, right, Nancy? There we go. I will.
Oh, that did go out to everybody.
Yes. Wonderful. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.